thank everybody for attending today. I'm just going to begin with a short statement, and afterwards I'll take questions if there are any. When you present questions, I just ask that you present them to me because Justin and Shauna are not prepared today to answer questions. Thank you. We're here today to formally announce that Justin Savage and Shauna Morse have filed suit against the state of Maine, the Maine State Police, and several of its officers for an excess of $100 million in damages for a brutal, violent, unlawful assault on Justin and in part on Shauna that occurred in March of 2024 at their home in Limerick, Maine. On that evening, Justin and Shauna had just returned home from a night out. A state police officer appeared at their home. They had no idea why the state police were present. Initially, the state police officer asked Justin to be compliant. She immediately asked him to turn around and allow her to pat him down. He fully complied. She then proceeded to ask him a series of questions, to which he answered cooperatively. During this period, two other officers with the Maine State Police appeared at the house. And an aggressive occurrence escalated. Justin was placed in handcuffs. He didn't resist. At one point, when Shauna was being questioned, Justin asked a question, and he was ignored. And he asked it again, and he was ignored again. And he asked it again, and he was told that if he didn't calm down, he would be arrested. And Justin asked the question again. And Officer Ritlin said, "You're under arrest," and immediately, from behind, without warning, the second officer lifted Justin off the ground and slammed him headfirst into the ground while handcuffed. In the process of doing that, the officer twisted his ankle. The officers then placed Justin in a police cruiser. While placing him in a police cruiser, a second officer, uncalled for, punched him in the face. Justin's bleeding profusely from his face. The officers then place what they call a spit mask over his head. They place it in such a way that he can't see. He still has on handcuffs. They put on leg restraints, and they leave him in the car unattended for an incredibly long time. Justin has asthma. Justin had a medical emergency. He couldn't breathe. He cried out for help. The police officers ignored him. In an effort to save himself, he somehow was able to unlatch the door, and he fell out of the police car onto the ground. That's when 4 or 5 state police officers and other personnel swarmed on him. And it's pitch black, and while they're swarming on him, one officer is on his shoulders, holding his face and head still, and repeatedly punching him in the face for no reason whatsoever. The whole episode is captured on video recording. This isn't a case where the state police can say, well, there was an occurrence prior to the video recording that will come out that will explain things, because the video recording was operating the entire time. Everything that occurred was captured on the video recording. There's no missing minutes in this particular video recording. Several experts on all sides of the political spectrum have reviewed the recording. None of them can justify the outrageous, illegal, wrongful use of force on Justin. And so the state police proceed to create their police reports after this occurrence. And in their police reports, they falsify their reports. they write into the reports that they applied this excessive amount of force on Justin because he was attempting to escape. There was no escape. That he had fought back. There was no fighting back. That he wasn't cooperative. He was fully cooperative the whole time. Everything produced by the state police to date has been a fabricated false narrative and continues to be. And evidence that was associated with the occurrence was either disposed of, spoliated, but certainly made unavailable to Justin's and Shauna's defense when they were charged criminally. Shauna was charged for using excessive force and interfering with police business on that night. She used no force. Justin was charged with attempting to escape, breaking the ankle of that police officer who pile-drived him headfirst into the ground, which didn't happen. Just Justin getting pile-drived while handcuffed headfirst into the ground happened. Eventually, prosecutors in York County reviewed the video footage and dismissed all charges against both Justin and Shauna. And the Maine State Police reviewed the video footage, so they say, and they see nothing wrong with how their officers conducted themselves that night. No discipline was issued. In fact, the worst offender was promoted to corporal, and the other officer who broke his ankle was given an annual award for suffering an injury while preventing the escape of someone attempting to escape police custody. That's how the state police responded to this case. They take no responsibility whatsoever for their actions. They conducted their internal reviews and exonerated their police personnel. Our research has shown that in the past 10 years, there have been 776 occurrences with the state police with the use of excessive force that have been reviewed. And of the 776 use of force cases that have been reviewed internally by the state police in the past 10 years, 0 officers have been found responsible for using excessive force. That statistic is implausible. The average nationally is that 7% of a given police force, at any point in time, 7% of the officers have crossed the line into use of excessive force. That Maine has a perfect record in the past 10 years means only one of 2 things. Either that the Maine State Police are perfect, or they're corrupt. And we now know they're not perfect because we have a videotape that shows the truth in comparison to the police reports that were produced by these officers. And so we now know that the Maine State Police are corrupt. They are corrupt at the highest levels of the organization. They conducted an internal affairs, and they found absolutely no wrongdoing on the part of their officers, despite the fact that Justin was handcuffed, lifted from behind, pile-driven into the ground head first, with providing no provocation for that whatsoever. And then while being placed in a police cruiser, still handcuffed with his hands behind his back, a second officer punches him in the face. Then they put a bag over his head so he can't see. He's drunk. He's bleeding into the mask. He's got asthma. He's sweating. And he can't breathe. And he can't see. And he's crying out for help. And they ignore him. And we saw a similar occurrence like that not too many years ago. And the person died. And you would think that after George Floyd's event, that the police would be more responsible, but apparently not with the Maine State Police. When he is able to at least open the door because they were ignoring him They then swarmed on him, and then totally unjustified, illegally, criminally, this officer repeatedly punched him in the face. If you watch carefully the videotape, the officer with one hand is holding his face in a still position, and with the other hand, he's lifting it, raising it repeatedly above his head, and then piling it down into Justin's face repeatedly and as hard as he can. Keep in mind, state police officers are trained combat personnel. They are in top physical shape. They all lift in the gyms. And Justin was defenseless with his hands cuffed behind his back, his legs cuffed together, and a face restraint blocking his view. With us, I have two pictures that show Justin not too many hours after the assault. I've never seen in the state of Maine a picture of a person taken into custody by the state police or any other police department bearing the injuries that Justin had that night. Those injuries are lasting, they're permanent. He has neurological deficits that result from them. His life will never be the same. And what happened never should have happened. But it did, because apparently there's a culture at the Maine State Police that this conduct is not only lawful, it's okay. Because if the state police had acted on any of the prior 776 cases it reviewed, then maybe what happened to Justin and Shauna that night in March of 2024 would not have happened. Reforms are necessary at the Maine State Police. They cannot be trusted with an internal review process. An external review process is required at the Maine State Police. One reform that we'll be seeking is to establish an external board, not an internal review, but an external review in all cases. And that board will be consisting of professionals in law enforcement, in the legal profession, in the judicial system, and citizens. In each case in which the Maine State Police use excessive force on someone in Maine, that should be reviewed. They can't be trusted to review it internally. It must be reviewed externally. And these officers must be charged criminally. Where are the indictments? What happened to Justin was a criminal act. If you or I put cuffs on a police officer, picked him up from behind, and pile drove him into the ground, we would be charged with criminal assault, perhaps attempted murder. If we cuffed a police officer from behind and repeatedly punched him in the face, we would be charged with criminal assault, perhaps attempted murder. Where are the indictments? Where are the criminal charges against these police personnel? They do not get special treatment in the law. We have one system of justice in this country. It's not a two-tiered track. They are held to the same standards. They are sworn to uphold the laws. They are not permitted to break the laws. And so we will not rest until we have reforms, until we have accountability, both civilly and criminally, by these officers. In Maine, falsifying a police report is a crime. It's a criminal statute on falsifying official records. In Maine, discarding evidence is a crime. We have a criminal statute on not preserving evidence associated with court cases, including criminal cases that are known to be going to be filed. And obviously in Justin's and Shauna's case, they filed a criminal complaint against each. Where are the criminal charges? And I would ask that our friends in the media start asking that question, because these officers are not above the law. They're held to the same standards that the rest of us are held to. And if they're not going to be held to account, then no one else should be held to account It starts with them. So this is an important case. This is the first chapter. A lawsuit's been filed. It's in the federal court in Portland, Maine. More proceedings will be coming, and we will keep you informed. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm just wondering how you arrived at the $100 million figure.
Because in 2025 terms, looking at this from a national perspective, and this is a national story, that is not an unwarranted amount of money. Firstly, Justin's been badly injured, as has Shauna. Justin has bad physical injuries. He did that night. They're lasting. Shauna has an injury, a tremendous psychological injury from witnessing what she did. They both were damaged in their names and reputations, and I think the public knows that names and reputations are very valuable in 2025. We've also brought a defamation lawsuit because the state of Maine falsely put on the internet that Justin and Shauna committed crimes that night, crimes that didn't occur. They were fabricated. They were fabricated because the state police officers were covering up their misconduct. They were looking for justification for what they did when they didn't have it. And so the $100 million figure is appropriate in 2025. Juries across the country have returned verdicts in recent years in excess of that amount. 2 weeks ago, a jury in Colorado returned a jury verdict in excess of $200 million. So the amount of money is an appropriate amount of money, but it's also an appropriate amount of money because unless you hold those accountable who do not accept accountability, you can't affect change. And so the amount of change we want to affect with the Maine State Police is significant. And the only way that we are going to create change is if we hold them accountable to that extent. And so that's how the number was arrived at.
What do you think of the Maine State Police response to the lawsuit, to the one that's been saying that Justin broke his ankle at that time, during the body slam, that broke his ankle? The other one is that Justin didn't want the officer to provoke him.
Sure. So the Maine State Police have had multiple different stories from the day of the event to the present. It keeps changing. People that tell the truth don't have to continually change their story. So initially the state police said that Justin was attempting to escape and the officer broke his ankle, preventing the escape. The videotape categorically shows that that's a lie. So now they've changed the story to, well, he wasn't cooperating. Well, the video recording also demonstrates that that's a lie. I'd also point out that the Maine State Police hired a former media professional to be the spokesperson on this case. She's talented, skilled, and slick, and she's putting out a false narrative. And she ought to stop, because if she continues, we may amend the complaint and have to assert a new claim of defamation. So I would caution the Maine State Police. We haven't done it yet, but they need to start telling the truth. Lawsuits are about holding people accountable who don't accept accountability. Anybody in a recovery program will tell you that the very first step to recovery is admission. And until you admit you have a problem, you can't identify it, and then you can't fix it. Well, the Maine State Police continue to deny that they have a problem. And so part of the reason why lawsuits happen in this country is because those who deny that they have a problem have to be held accountable by the community. And so in a lawsuit, a jury is assembled. They're citizens from the community. They hear the event, and then they hold those people accountable who refuse to accept accountability. That's how you affect change. That's how you get reform. That's how the legal system works in the United States.
Were you told why the charges were dropped against Justin by the state prosecutors?
No, they just said that they reviewed the evidence and used their discretion not to proceed. In layperson's terms, what that means is they didn't have a case. If they had a case, Justin and Shauna would have been prosecuted. They'd be in jail. If that video recording didn't exist, they would be in jail. That's the bottom line. But for the video recording, we would be here. We would have a different situation, a different outcome. thank God for Justin and Shauna that there was a video recording. But that's what prosecutors do. They review the evidence, and then they decide whether or not there's sufficient evidence to charge. And they reviewed this evidence and couldn't support a case.
And do they also review the police action in this?
They don't review the police action unless they open a grand jury. And I'm calling on the York County District Attorney's Office to start a grand jury. This case needs to be reviewed by a grand jury, and indictments need to follow from that. And if that doesn't happen, then the criminal justice system in the state of Maine isn't worth anything. And I absolutely implore the York County District Attorney's Office to take the extraordinary step, have the courage that Justin and Shauna have, and start a grand jury, and let a grand jury decide whether or not the police officers violated the law that night.
We spoke to a legal expert a few weeks ago, talking about tensing up in these situations and how that might be a form of resisting. What's your response to that?
I'd question the credentials of that so-called legal expert. I would cite him to Supreme Court precedent that has been around for at least 50 years. 50 years ago or longer, the United States Supreme Court ruled, I remember from my childhood, in the 60s, people would taunt the police, call them pigs. Sometimes they'd use more offensive language than that. And a case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. The United States Supreme Court said people that live in the United States have a First Amendment right of free speech, and it doesn't end when you're interacting with a police officer. So unless you're committing a crime, you can conduct yourself in any lawful way. And so to the extent that so-called expert says that tensing up, in my experience, and I've reviewed other arrest videotapes, and I've witnessed arrests in person. I've been present for those. Early in my career, I worked with a prosecutor's office in Middlesex County in Massachusetts. I had the occasion to go with the police. I'm actually would say that it's unusual for someone who's being placed under arrest not to, and to some extent, tense up. It's a tenseful situation. I'd also add to that the police are specially trained. They're professionals. One of the claims we've brought against the police in this case is for professional negligence, because they're professionals. They're held to a higher standard. They have specialized training. So they're supposed to be trained to interact with people who may use less than polite language or may have some amount of tenseness to them. And they're trained to de-escalate those situations. That didn't happen here. All professional training. If you review the videotape, if I were to put on a class for law enforcement or a law school or a college course on what not to do, this would be the recording that I would use. There was no professionalism whatsoever, and there was no wrongful conduct of any kind on the part of Justin or Shauna that night.
Have you gotten any response from politicians, advocacy groups in terms of the lawsuit you filed?
The only response I'm aware of, and I didn't receive it directly, but Governor Mills gave a statement. She said, this is the reason why we have juries. I've known Governor Mills my whole lifetime. I know her well. I respect her a great deal, and I agree with her. This is why we do have juries, and a jury will decide this case.
Have you had any other communication with Maine State Police since the lawsuits were filed?
No, and that's disheartening. In Maine, before you can bring a lawsuit like this, you have to provide the state with a detailed notice of what your claim is. And then the state has 6 to 12 months to investigate that and make an overture and attempt to settle the case if it chooses to do so. We received no response whatsoever. The response was crickets. They take zero accountability, and that's why we've been forced to. We do not. Shauna and Justin do not want to be in the legal system. They don't want to be suing the Maine State Police or the state of Maine. They don't want to be suing these officers. They want to be living their lives. But when someone takes no accountability for outrageous, illegal behaviors, you know, the only recourse is to bring a judicial action and to have a jury hold those people accountable. And so, no, there was no response.
I know the video shows a lot of what happened to Justin, and there's brief moments of what happened to Shauna. Can you talk a little bit more about, you know, her getting detained? She's breathing very heavily. That moment, the impact it's had on her life.
Well, she's a life partner with Justin, and so it's a marital type relationship and has been for a long time. And they live in their home with their children. And their children were exposed to this that night. And so for her, when Justin was unable to breathe, this became a very concerning moment, especially because of what happened with George Floyd. And it's well known that an asthmatic having an episode without their inhaler can die. And he was not only unable to breathe, and she has seen him in a fit like that before, so she knew it was real. And Justin was hollering out to the police for help, but she's hollering out to the police for help, and she's telling them that he's an asthmatic, and they're ignoring her. They're holding her back with force, and they're not assisting Justin, and she's watching him suffer, and potentially in a life-threatening way. And all I can say is that from my perspective, from what I've seen, I've really not been in the company of many people who have shown extreme emotional distress when she revisits these events as Shauna does. And I believe her emotional distress to be severe, and I believe it to be real, and I don't know that she'll recover from it soon.
Can you speak a little bit to what they were feeling in these moments when Justin was on the ground, when the mask was over his face? I know they're not talking today, but can you speak to what they're thinking in that moment?
Only Justin or Shauna could tell you what they were thinking in a moment like that. I can only tell you what I've seen. And what I've seen, observing the video recording, is horrific. And I mean, to literally tie someone's hands behind their back and their legs together and cover their head in a bag, and then repeatedly pound them in the face, so that when you're done, the person's face looks like Justin's face in these posters in front of us. I can't possibly get inside his head to tell you what he was thinking, but I can tell you that it makes me ill when I think about what that must have been like if I were in that situation. I cannot imagine it. You know, I spoke earlier about having not seen images like this in the state of Maine. The only image that I recall in my lifetime in Maine was several years ago. John Williams was arrested. He's the gentleman, he's in state prison right now. He's the gentleman who killed a Corporal Coate, Eugene Coate. And he then went hiding in the woods. There was a long manhunt for him. It was approximately a week long. And I remember the day the state police dragged him out of the woods, there was a camera shot of John Williams, and I believe it's still available online. And his face had been punched in. And he claimed that he was subjected to excessive force during that arrest. They didn't have video cameras, you know, back then, at least not out in the woods. And so there was no video footage. And so I always wondered, I don't know what happened to John Williams that night. It always looked suspicious. But even his beating, whatever occurred, pales in comparison to what they did to Justin. And he was a fugitive on the run, hiding in the woods, and the state police had to go in and extract him. Justin had come home from a night out and was standing in the driveway of his home. You know, markedly different situations. And so the amount of force used on Justin, it can't be justified.
since this case has been publicized, have you had any contact, or anybody reach out to you who had similar experiences with Maine State Police? We've talked about their sort of perfect record. I'm wondering if you've become aware of other incidents that sort of compare to this one.
I have been contacted by people that have been subjected to what they believe excessive force. And I've also been contacted by other attorneys and law firms in the state who have clients that have also been making claims of being subjected to excessive force. Client confidentiality reasons, I can't disclose names or occurrences, but yes, we've been contacted multiple times over the past 2 weeks. All right, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you for coming. We've provided an information packet. If there are any additional questions, please feel free to reach out, and we will update you as the case proceeds through the legal system. Thank you.
Thank you.
All set. Thank you. You can walk around.